Sometimes the most unlikely friendships are born from the darkest moments. In a world where compassion seemed as rare as desert rain, two souls would find each other against impossible odds. In the unforgiving Old West, young Lila runs through the wilderness, injured and desperate, with bounty hunters closing in. Her whispered plea echoes through the canyon. "It hurts. Please help." When wealthy cowboy Cole discovers her, something stirs in his heart he's never felt before. He knows protecting her means defying everything his world stands for, challenging society's foundations. But some choices go deeper than expectations, deeper than fear. As danger closes in from all sides, their bond grows stronger. But can love truly conquer the prejudices that threaten to tear their worlds apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The morning sun painted the Colorado Territory in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the sprawling Thornfield Ranch. Cole Matheson stood on his wraparound porch, coffee steaming in his weathered hands, watching his cattle graze in the distance. At 42, he had built something substantial from nothing: 10,000 acres of prime grazing land, a mansion that rivaled anything back east, and a reputation as one of the most successful ranchers in 3 counties. The silver pocket watch, tucked in his vest, had belonged to his father, a reminder of simpler times when the Matheson name meant nothing more than hard work and honest sweat. Now it carried weight. Political influence, social standing, and expectations that sometimes felt heavier than the Colorado mountains themselves. "Morning, Mr. Matheson," called Miguel Santos, his foreman, riding up with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. Miguel had been with Cole for 15 years, since the early days when the ranch was nothing but hope and determination. Dark-skinned and steady-eyed, Miguel understood the unspoken language between man and land better than anyone Cole had ever known. "How are the northern pastures looking?" Cole asked, setting his cup on the porch rail. "Good grazing for another month, maybe 2 if the rain holds." Miguel's weathered face crinkled with concern. "But we've got other troubles brewing. Word from town is the Grayson gang's been seen moving through the territory. They've hit 2 homesteads south of Pine Ridge." Cole's jaw tightened. The Graysons were more than common outlaws. They were bounty hunters with a taste for cruelty, taking contracts that decent men wouldn't touch. Their leader, Dutch Grayson, had a reputation for bringing in his quarry dead more often than alive, claiming they resisted arrest. "Any word on what they're hunting?" "Run away, they say." Young girl, offering $500 for her return. Miguel spat into the dust. $500 for a child, Mr. Matheson. What kind of world we living in?" The question hung in the morning air like smoke from a distant fire. Cole had seen enough of the world's darkness during his years building this empire. The railroad expansion had brought progress, but also attracted men who viewed human suffering as a business opportunity. The boundaries between law and lawlessness had blurred until sometimes there seemed no difference at all. "Double the watch on the property," Cole said finally. "I don't want those animals anywhere near our people." Miguel nodded and rode off, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts and the familiar weight of responsibility. The ranch employed 47 men and women, cowboys, house staff, stable hands, and seasonal workers. Many had families, children who played in the shade of the cottonwoods he'd planted along the main drive. Their safety was his burden to bear. The Thornfield mansion rose behind him like something from a fevered dream of success. 3 stories of hand-carved timber and imported stone, with wide windows that caught the morning light and reflected it back across the valley. His late wife, Catherine, had designed every detail during the 2 brief years they'd shared before consumption claimed her gentle spirit. Walking through its rooms sometimes felt like living inside a beautiful memory. "Cole, you're going to be late for the town meeting." The voice belonged to his sister Margaret, 5 years younger and infinitely more social. She emerged from the house in a traveling dress of deep blue wool, her hair pinned in the latest fashion from Denver. Margaret had moved west after her husband's death in the war, bringing her sharp wit and unwavering opinions about how Cole should live his life. "The town can survive without my input for once," Cole replied, though he was already moving toward the stables. "The town, perhaps, but can Sarah Whitmore survive without seeing your handsome face across the meeting hall?" Cole paused, feeling the familiar knot of expectation in his chest. Sarah Whitmore was everything society deemed appropriate for a man. In his position, young, beautiful, from a prominent Denver family, and blessed with all the social graces that defined proper womanhood. She'd been visiting Pine Ridge for 6 months, staying with her aunt, while her father conducted business with the territorial government. "Sarah's a fine woman," he said carefully. "Fine?" Margaret laughed. "Cole Matheson, that woman could grace the governor's mansion if she wanted. Half the eligible men in Colorado are writing her poetry, and she barely notices them because she's too busy making eyes at my stubborn brother." The truth was more complicated. Sarah represented everything his world expected: respectability, social advancement, the kind of partnership that would elevate the Matheson name even further. But something in Cole resisted the neat categories of proper courtship. Perhaps it was the memory of Catherine's easy laughter, or perhaps it was something deeper, a restlessness he couldn't name. 20 minutes later, Cole was riding his stallion, thunder toward Pine Ridge, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats matching the steady pulse of his thoughts. The trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, their branches creating a natural cathedral above the worn path. This land had shaped him as much as he'd shaped it, teaching lessons about patience, persistence, and the careful balance between ambition and wisdom. Pine Ridge sprawled along the banks of Clear Creek, like a town that couldn't decide what it wanted to become. Main Street boasted a proper bank, hotel, and general store, but the back alleys still harbored saloons where card games lasted for days and questions about a man's past were considered poor manners. The town meeting was held in the largest space available, the back room of Henderson's Mercantile, where folding chairs and makeshift benches accommodated the dozen or so citizens who cared about municipal affairs. Mayor Jim Harwick, a thin man with oversized ambitions, was already holding court when Cole arrived. And that's why we need to consider the railroad's proposal seriously, folks. Progress doesn't wait for anyone. Cole found a seat near the back, nodding to familiar faces. Tom Henderson, who'd sold him supplies during the ranch's early years. Doc Morrison, whose steady hands had seen the town through cholera outbreaks and gunfights. Martha Sims, the schoolteacher whose fierce dedication to education had earned the respect of even the most hardened cowboys. And Sarah Whitmore, sitting in the front row with perfect posture and an attentive expression that somehow managed to find Cole's eyes despite the crowded room. The meeting droned on, discussions about road maintenance, taxes, and the eternal debate over where to build the new church. Cole contributed when asked, his opinions carrying the weight that came with success and community investment. But his mind kept drifting to Miguel's words about the Grayson gang and their $500 bounty. After the meeting, Sarah approached, with the kind of confident grace that came from a lifetime of social training. "Mr. Matheson, might I have a word?" They stepped outside into the afternoon sun, where the sounds of town life provided a comfortable backdrop, horses snorting, children playing, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. "I wanted to thank you for supporting the school fund initiative," Sarah said. "Education is so important, especially out here where civilization needs all the help it can get." Cole finished with a slight smile. Sarah's laugh was like silver bells. "I was going to say where opportunity should belong to everyone, regardless of their circumstances." There it was, the quality that set Sarah apart from other society women Cole had known. Beneath her polished exterior lay genuine conviction, a belief that progress meant more than just personal advancement. "Speaking of opportunity," she continued, My aunt is hosting a dinner party Saturday evening. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends from Denver and some local folks. I do hope you'll consider joining us." Before Cole could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street, raised voices, the crash of broken glass, and then the unmistakable sound of men spoiling for a fight. Cole's hand instinctively moved toward his gun as three rough-looking strangers emerged, their clothes dusty from hard travel. The leader was a big man, with pale eyes and a beard that couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth. Dutch Grayson himself. Cole realized with cold certainty. The bounty hunter's reputation preceded him like the smell of death. "Evening, folks," Grayson called out, his voice carrying across the street with false friendliness. "Lovely town you got here. Very hospitable." His companions laughed at some private joke, their hands resting easy on their gun handles. They mounted their horses with the casual arrogance of men accustomed to intimidating others. As they rode past, Grayson's pale eyes met Cole's for just a moment. Something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or the instinctive awareness of one predator acknowledging another. Then they were gone, heading north toward the mountains, leaving only dust and an uncomfortable silence in their wake. "Who were those men?" Sarah asked, moving closer to Cole's side. "Trouble," Cole replied, watching until the riders disappeared around the bend. The kind of trouble that decent folks shouldn't have to worry about. But even as he spoke the words, Cole felt something stirring in the back of his mind, a restlessness that had nothing to do with business meetings or proper courtships. The mountains held secrets, and somewhere out there, a young girl was running for her life from men who viewed her as nothing more than a payday. The silver watch in his vest seemed to tick louder as the shadows grew longer, marking time toward a destiny he couldn't yet imagine. The storm hit just after midnight, turning the Colorado sky into a canvas of lightning and thunder. Cole stood at his bedroom window, watching nature's fury lash against the mountains, when thunder's sharp whinny cut through the night. The stallion was agitated, pacing in his stall with the restless energy that meant danger was near. Cole dressed quickly, pulling on his boots and coat before stepping into the driving rain. The barn lantern cast dancing shadows as he made his way toward Thunder's stall, but the horse wasn't looking at him. His ears were pricked toward the northern pasture, where something moved in the darkness. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured, running, his hand along Thunder's neck. The stallion settled slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on whatever lurked beyond the circle of lamplight. That's when Cole heard it. A sound so faint it was almost lost in the storm. A whimper, like a wounded animal, coming from the direction of the old line shack near Willow Creek. He grabbed his rifle and lantern, stepping back into the rain without hesitation. The line shack sat empty most of the year, used only during roundups when the hands needed shelter in the far pastures. Cole approached cautiously, his boots squelching in the mud, rifle ready for whatever he might find. Bears sometimes sheltered there, or worse, men like the Graysons, looking for a place to wait out pursuit. The door hung open, creaking in the wind. Cole raised his lantern and peered inside. What he saw stopped him cold. A young girl, maybe 16, huddled in the far corner. Her clothes were torn and muddy, dark skin made darker by dried blood that streaked down her face from a gash above. Her left eye. But it was her eyes that hit him like a physical blow, wide with terror and pain, but also something else, defiance. This child had been through hell, but she hadn't given up. "Please," she whispered, the words barely audible above the storm. "Please don't hurt me." Cole immediately set his rifle aside and raised both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Cole. What's yours?" She watched him with the wariness of a wild animal, ready to bolt despite her injuries. When she tried to move, a sharp intake of breath revealed broken ribs, or worse. "Lila," she finally said. "My name is Lila. Lila, you're hurt. Let me help you." "You don't understand." Her voice cracked. "They're looking for me. The men, they'll kill anyone who helps me." Cole's stomach clenched as pieces fell into place. $500. A young girl. The Grayson gang's cruel reputation for bringing back bounties dead rather than alive. What men, Lila? Bounty hunters. They say I'm a runaway slave, but I'm not. Tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. I was born free in Kansas. My mama died last year. Fever took her. These men, they came to our town, said I belonged to some plantation in Georgia, said they had papers. Cole's hands tightened into fists. He'd heard the stories. Free blacks kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South, their freedom papers destroyed or ignored. Legal under territorial law, but it sickened him to his core. They burned our house, Lila continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Killed Mr. Johnson when he tried to help. I ran. Been running for 2 weeks. A folded piece of paper fell from her torn dress pocket. Freedom papers, Cole realized, signed by a Kansas judge and bearing official seals. But papers meant nothing to men like Dutch Grayson when there was money to be made. Thunder's whinny carried across the pasture, followed by the sound of approaching horses. Cole's blood turned to ice. They'd found her trail. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently. Lila nodded, though her face went pale with the effort of standing. Cole wrapped his coat around her shoulders and helped her to the door. Through the rain, he could see torches moving toward them, 3 riders spread out in a search pattern. "This way," he whispered, leading her toward Thunder's stall. The stallion stood ready, as if sensing the urgency. Cole helped Lila onto the horse's back, her small frame nearly disappearing behind Thunder's powerful shoulders. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." But even as he spoke, Cole knew there was no truly safe place for a girl like Lila in a territory where bounty hunters operated with impunity. Not unless someone was willing to stand between her and the men who saw her as property. They rode through the storm toward the main house, Cole's mind racing through possibilities. He could hide her in the root cellar, claim ignorance if questioned. He could give her money and supplies, send her further west where the law might be more sympathetic. He could contact his lawyer in Denver, try to make her case through legal channels. But all of those solutions assumed the bounty hunters would play by rules that didn't exist for people like Lila. The house loomed ahead, its windows golden with lamplight. Margaret appeared at the front door, wrapped in her robe, having been awakened by the commotion. "Cole, what on earth?" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Lila, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to fierce protectiveness in the space of a heartbeat. "Inside," Cole said simply. Margaret stepped aside without question, helping Lila down from Thunder's back. The girl swayed on her feet, exhaustion and pain finally overwhelming her adrenaline. "Put her in the guest room," Cole told his sister. "Hot water, clean clothes, bandages for her wounds." "And if those men come looking?" Margaret asked quietly. Cole's jaw set hard. "Then they'll have to go through me." As Margaret led Lila upstairs, the girl turned back to look at Cole. In her eyes, he saw something that made his chest tight. Hope, fragile and desperate, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole watched them disappear up the stairs, then walked to his gun cabinet. He selected a shotgun and began loading shells with methodical precision. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, but he knew the real tempest was just beginning. In helping Lila, he was defying more than just bounty hunters. He was challenging a system that reduced human beings to property, confronting prejudices so deeply rooted they were accepted as natural law. The social consequences alone could destroy everything he'd built: his reputation, his business relationships, his standing in the community. But as he looked at those freedom papers, now drying by the fire, Cole realized that some things mattered more than social standing. Some choices defined not just what a man owned, but who he truly was. Thunder stamped impatiently in his stall, and Cole could hear riders approaching through the clearing night. The Graysons had found the trail. He checked his weapons one final time and walked out onto the porch to wait for them. Whatever came next, Lila wouldn't face it alone. The silver pocket watch in his vest ticked steadily against his chest, marking time toward a confrontation that would change everything he thought he knew about courage, justice, and the true cost of doing what was right. Dawn broke grey and uncertain over the Thornfield ranch, matching Cole's mood as he sat in his study, nursing his third cup of coffee. The confrontation with the Graysons had been brief but telling. They demanded to search his property, claimed they were tracking a dangerous fugitive. Cole had met them at his gate with Miguel and 6 armed ranch hands, making it clear that trespassers weren't welcome. Dutch Grayson had smiled that cold smile of his. "You sure about that, Matherson? This here's legal business, sanctioned by territorial law. $500 buys a lot of legal business." "Not on my land, it doesn't." The bounty hunters had backed down, but Cole knew it was temporary. Men like Grayson didn't give up easily, especially when money was involved. A soft knock at the study door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Margaret entered carrying a tea tray. "She's finally sleeping," she said quietly. "Poor child was exhausted. I had to help her wash. Cole, the scars on her back tell a story no 16-year-old should have to live." Cole's hands tightened on his coffee cup. "What kind of scars?" "Old ones, from before she escaped. Whatever that girl endured, it wasn't the free life she claimed." Margaret set down the tray and fixed her brother with a look he remembered from childhood, the one that said she was about to speak uncomfortable truths. "There's something else. While I was tending her wounds, she kept mumbling in her sleep. Names, mostly. But one thing she said clear as day. Mama's journal." "They can't have Mama's journal." Cole frowned. "Did she have anything like that with her? Just those freedom papers and the clothes on her back?" "But Cole, think about it. If her mother kept a journal, it might contain proof of their free status, maybe even evidence of what really happened to them. The implications were staggering. Written testimony from a free black woman could expose the entire kidnapping operation, potentially saving others from Lila's fate. But first, they had to find it. "She's asked to see you when she wakes," Margaret continued. "I think she needs to know she can trust you before she'll tell us everything." 2 hours later, Cole knocked gently on the guest room door. "Lila, it's Cole. May I come in?" "Yes, sir." She was sitting by the window, wearing one of Margaret's dresses that was far too large for her slight frame. The gash above her eye had been properly cleaned and bandaged, but the haunted look remained. Sunlight revealed details he'd missed in the storm. High cheekbones like carved ivory, intelligent eyes that seemed older than her years, and hands that bore the calluses of hard work. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you. Your sister, she's been very kind." Lila's voice was soft but clear, with the careful pronunciation of someone who'd been taught to speak properly. "I know this puts you in danger, Mr. Matherson. If you want me to leave, you're not going anywhere until you're healed." Cole pulled up a chair, keeping his voice gentle. "But I need to understand what we're dealing with. Those men won't give up easily." Lila nodded, her fingers worrying at the fabric of her borrowed dress. "My mama, she always said to tell the truth, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." She took a shaky breath. "We lived in Lawrence, Kansas. Mama was a seamstress, real skilled. She could read and write better than most white folks, learned it from the minister's wife when she was young. Papa died when I was small, but Mama never remarried. Said she was too independent for most men." Cole could hear the love and loss in her voice, could picture a woman who'd raised her daughter to be strong and educated despite the obstacles. "About 6 months ago, these men came to town. Said they were investigating stolen property, slaves who'd run north. Mama got scared, started talking about moving west, maybe California. But before we could leave..." Lila's voice broke slightly. "They came for us in the night. The men who burned your house? Some of them, but they had help, local men, ones we thought were friends. They said our papers were forgeries, that we belonged to some plantation in Georgia called Riverside Manor." Lila's eyes flashed with anger. "But Mama was born free in Missouri. Her parents were freed by their master's will in 1820. She had the papers to prove it." Cole felt pieces clicking into place. "The journal your sister mentioned, did it contain..." Those original papers? Lila looked startled. How did you know about that? You mentioned it while you were sleeping. Where is it now? Hidden. Mama made me promise to keep it safe, said it was the only thing that could protect us if anyone ever questioned our freedom. She met Cole's eyes directly. It's back in Lawrence, in a place only I know. But if those bounty hunters find it first, Cole understood. Without that journal, Lila had only her word against forged documents and the twisted logic of men who profited from human misery. We'll get it back, he said firmly. You don't understand. Lawrence is 3 days hard riding from here, and they'll be watching for me. It's too dangerous. Then we'll make sure they don't see you coming. Before Lila could protest, Margaret's voice called from downstairs. Cole, you need to see this. They found her at the front window, holding back the curtain with one finger. A single rider was approaching the house, Sarah Whitmore, dressed for traveling and looking determined. She probably heard about last night's excitement, Margaret said. News travels fast in a small town. Cole watched Sarah's approach with mixed feelings. Her presence complicated everything, but he couldn't simply dismiss her without explanation. Lila, you should go back upstairs. Keep away from the windows. The girl nodded and disappeared, moving with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to avoiding notice. Cole straightened his shirt and walked out to meet Sarah, forcing a smile he didn't feel. Sarah, this is an unexpected pleasure. She dismounted with practiced ease, her expression serious. Cole, I heard there was trouble last night, men asking questions in town about a runaway. She paused, studying his face. I also heard you sent them away rather forcefully. A man's property is his own business. Indeed it is. Sarah's eyes were sharp, missing nothing. I also know you well enough to recognize when you're carrying a burden. If there's anything I can do to help. Cole felt the weight of her offer, the genuine concern behind it. Sarah represented everything his world considered right and proper, but she also possessed an intelligence that might prove valuable. Still, involving her would put her at risk, potentially destroying her reputation along with his own. I appreciate the offer, Sarah, but some burdens are best carried alone. Her smile was understanding but sad. Perhaps. But sometimes the heaviest burdens are made lighter by sharing them with someone who cares. As she rode away, Cole realized he was facing a choice that went deeper than protecting Lila. He was being forced to decide what kind of man he truly wanted to be, and what he was willing to sacrifice to become that man. 3 days passed in, an uneasy peace that Cole knew couldn't last. Lila grew stronger, helping Margaret with small tasks around the house while staying carefully out of sight. She was intelligent and quick-witted, with an education that surprised even Margaret, who taught school back in Ohio before the war. That girl knows more poetry than half the college boys I've met, Margaret confided to Cole over breakfast. Her mother did well by her, considering their circumstances. Cole nodded, watching through the window as Miguel approached the house with his usual purposeful stride. The foreman's expression was grim, and Cole suspected the peaceful interlude was about to end. Boss, we got problems, Miguel announced without preamble. 3 of the hands came in from the north pasture with word that strangers have been asking questions in Millerville. Same descriptions as those bounty hunters, but they're being careful, staying legal. What kind of questions? About a young colored girl traveling alone, offering good money for information, claiming she stole something valuable from her former owner. Miguel's weathered face showed his disgust. They got the sheriff thinking they're legitimate lawmen. Cole felt cold dread settle in his chest. Sheriff Morrison was an honest man, but he operated strictly by territorial law. If the Graysons presented convincing forgeries, Morrison would be legally bound to assist them. There's more, Miguel continued. They've set up camp at the old Brennan place, maybe 2 hours north. Got themselves positioned to watch all the main roads. This ain't just hunting anymore, boss. This is a siege. Before Cole could respond, Lila appeared in the doorway. She'd obviously been listening, and her face was pale but determined. They're never going to stop, she said quietly. As long as I'm here, I'm putting all of you in danger. "You're not going anywhere," Margaret said firmly from behind her. "Those animals will have to go through this family first." "Margaret's right," Cole agreed. "But Miguel has a point about the sheriff. We need to get ahead of whatever story they're telling." An idea was forming in his mind, dangerous but potentially brilliant. The Graysons were confident in their legal position, but that confidence could be their weakness. If Cole could prove their documents were forgeries, expose their operation publicly, it might not only save Lila, but prevent them from victimizing others. "The journal," he said suddenly. "Lila, you said your mother's journal is hidden in Lawrence. What exactly is in it?" Lila moved to the window, staring out at the mountains, as if she could see across the miles to her former home. "Everything. Mama was careful to record all our family history, birth certificates, freedom papers going back, to my great-grandparents, letters from the minister who taught her to read. She even kept newspaper clippings about abolition movements, said they proved our right to be free." Cole felt excitement building. Would that be enough to prove your case in court? Maybe. But getting it means going back to Lawrence and... Lila turned to face him, her eyes wide with understanding. "You're thinking of making the trip yourself. It's the only way to get evidence that would hold up legally." "Cole," Margaret said sharply, "that's 3 days of hard riding through territory, crawling with those bounty hunters. Even if you make it to Lawrence without being seen, how would you find something hidden by someone you've never met?" Lila straightened her shoulders. "He wouldn't have to. I'd go with him." "Absolutely not," Cole and Margaret said simultaneously. "You don't understand," Lila continued, her voice gaining strength. "The hiding place isn't something I can just describe. Mama was clever. She built a false bottom in an old trunk, but the mechanism is tricky. You have to press 3 specific spots in the right order, or it won't open." Cole saw the logic, even as every protective instinct rebelled against the idea. "It's too dangerous. More dangerous than waiting here for them to find a legal way to take me. Mr. Matheson, those men killed good people in Lawrence. They burned my home and destroyed my life. I can't hide forever." Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. Cole moved to the window and cursed under his breath. Sheriff Morrison rode up the drive, flanked by 2 deputies and, Cole's stomach dropped, Dutch Grayson himself. "Upstairs," Cole told Lila urgently. "Stay away from the windows." She disappeared without argument, her bare feet silent on the wooden floors. Cole checked his appearance in the hall mirror, then walked out onto the porch with the casual confidence of the man who had nothing to hide. "Sheriff Morrison, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Morrison dismounted heavily, his face apologetic but determined. He was a good man caught in an impossible situation, trying to balance justice with legal obligation. "Cole, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask about some visitors you might have had recently." Grayson remained mounted, his pale eyes scanning the ranch buildings with predatory intensity. "We have reason to believe the fugitive passed through this area 3 nights ago, during that storm." "What kind of fugitive?" Cole asked mildly. "Runaway slave," Morrison replied, consulting a folded paper. "Young colored girl, maybe 16, stole valuable property from her owner in Georgia, then fled north. Mr. Grayson here has legal authorization to return her." Cole forced himself to remain calm as Grayson produced an official-looking document. The forgery was good. Territorial seals, judge's signature, all the proper legal language. To someone like Morrison, who wanted to believe in the system's integrity, it would appear completely legitimate. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," Cole said truthfully. He'd seen Lila, but she wasn't what these papers claimed. "Mind if we search your property?" Grayson asked with false politeness. "Just to be thorough." "I do mind, actually." Cole replied, "Sheriff, do you have a search warrant?" Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Well, no, but if you'd consent to a quick look around..." "I'm afraid I can't do that. I've got business to attend to, and frankly, I don't appreciate armed strangers making demands on my property." Grayson's smile turned ugly. "Careful, Matheson. Harboring a fugitive slave is a federal crime. The penalties are severe." Good thing I'm not harboring anyone then. The tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Morrison cleared his throat. Well, if you do see anything suspicious, you'll let us know? Of course, Sheriff. As the men prepared to leave, Grayson leaned down from his saddle, his voice pitched low enough that only Cole could hear. She's here, isn't she? I can smell the fear on you, Matherson. When I find her, and I will find her, I'll make sure you regret interfering with legal business. Cole met his stare without flinching. And when you try, you'll find out why interfering with me was your last mistake. After they rode away, Cole found Lila sitting on the stairs, having heard every word. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her jaw was set with fierce determination. We leave tonight, she said simply. For Lawrence, it's the only way to end this. Cole wanted to argue, to find another solution that didn't put this brave girl in more danger. But looking at her face, he realized she was right. Sometimes the only way through hell was straight ahead. The small leather-bound notebook tucked in her torn dress pocket, her mother's diary, the one possession she'd managed to save, seemed to pulse with the weight of all their hopes. The evening. Air carried the scent of pine and approaching autumn as Cole prepared for a journey that would change everything. In his private study, he spread maps across his desk while Lila sat nearby, her mother's small diary open in her lap. The worn leather cover had been carefully mended multiple times, testament to how precious it had been to the woman who'd kept it. Mama started writing in this when I was born, Lila said softly, running her fingers over the faded ink. She said every free person should record their story in case someone ever tried to claim they weren't. Cole looked up from the maps. What does it say about your family? Lila turned to a page near the beginning, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting sacred text. Here, today my daughter Lila came into this world, born free under God's sky in Lawrence, Kansas. May she never know the weight of chains, neither on her body nor in her spirit. She paused, emotion thickening her voice. There's more. Names, dates, places, everything that proves we were never slaves. And it's hidden in your old house, in the trunk in Mama's bedroom. She showed me the secret when I turned 15. Said it was my responsibility to protect our family's truth. Lila closed the diary carefully. Mr. Matherson, why are you doing this? Really, I mean, you could lose everything. The question hung in the lamplight like smoke from a dying fire. Cole had asked himself the same thing a dozen times since pulling Lila from that line shack. The easy answer was simple human decency. No. One deserved to be hunted like an animal, but the truth ran deeper. Do you know what this is? Cole pulled the silver pocket watch from his vest, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Lila shook her head. It belonged to my father. He was a poor farmer in Missouri, worked a small piece of land that barely fed our family. But he taught. It's something I've never forgotten. That a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to sacrifice for what's right. Cole thumbed open the watch, revealing an inscription on the inside cover. To my son, may you always choose courage over comfort. He died when I was 22, Cole continued. I inherited that hardscrabble farm and swore I'd never be poor again. Spent 20 years building this ranch, accumulating wealth and influence, becoming someone people respected. He snapped. The watch closed, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of why any of it mattered. Lila studied his face in the golden light. And helping me helps you remember. Helping you reminds me who I wanted to become when I was young and still believed the world could be just. Cole stood, moving to the window where moonlight painted the ranch building silver. I've spent so much time being successful that I forgot about being decent. Before Lila could respond, Margaret entered with an armful of supplies. Food for 3 days, extra blankets, medical supplies and ammunition, she announced, setting everything on the desk. Also, these. She produced a set of men's clothing, pants, shirt, vest and hat, all sized for someone Lila's slight build. If you're determined to make this fool journey, Margaret continued, You'll travel as my nephew visiting from Denver. Lila, with your hair tucked up and the right posture, you could pass for a young man from a distance." Lila held up the clothes, examining the quality of the fabric. "These are expensive. They belong to my son," Margaret said quietly. Cole felt his chest tighten. Margaret rarely spoke of Thomas, the boy she'd lost to scarlet fever at age 14. The clothes had been packed away for 6 years, too precious to discard, but too painful to see. "Margaret, are you sure?" "Thomas would have liked Lila," his sister said firmly. "He always rooted for the underdog. Besides, practical disguises require quality clothing. A poor boy traveling with a wealthy rancher draws questions. A well-dressed young gentleman does not." As Lila held the clothes against herself, Cole saw Margaret's point. With the right posture and attitude, she could indeed pass for a young man from good family, educated, refined, someone whose presence beside Cole would raise no eyebrows. "We'll need to practice," Cole said. "Walking, talking, carrying yourself like a man. Small details matter when lives depend on the deception." They spent the next hour working on Lila's disguise. Margaret proved surprisingly adept at masculine mannerisms, demonstrating the longer stride, broader gestures, and confident posture expected of young men from prominent families. "Remember," Margaret coached, "you're not trying to be rough or crude. You're portraying a gentleman's son, educated, well-mannered, but with the unconscious confidence that comes from privilege." Lila proved a quick study, adjusting her voice to a lower register and adopting the subtle air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. When she finally stood before them in full disguise, the transformation was remarkable. "Impressive," Cole admitted. "What name will you use?" "Thomas," Lila said simply, meeting Margaret's eyes. "Thomas Matthews, your business partner's nephew from Denver." Margaret's smile was tremulous but proud. He would have been honored. Miguel knocked and entered, carrying 2 rifles and a pair of Colt revolvers. "Boss, I've been thinking about your route. The main roads are being watched, but there's an old cattle trail that runs through the high country. More difficult, but it would keep you away from prying eyes." Cole studied the map Miguel indicated. The mountain route would add a day to their journey, but offered better concealment. "What about supplies?" "There's an old line camp halfway through, stocked for emergencies. You could rest the horses there, maybe get some sleep before the final push to Lawrence." As they finalized their plans, Cole found himself watching Lila, or Thomas, as he'd have to think of her now. There was something different about her tonight, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. The frightened girl he'd found in the storm was becoming someone stronger. "What happens after we get the journal?" she asked. "We take it to Judge Harrison in Denver. He's fair-minded and won't be impressed by forged documents if we can prove what they are. And if the bounty hunters catch us before then," Cole's hand moved instinctively to his gun, "then they'll discover that some things are worth fighting before." Later, as final preparations were made, Cole found himself alone with his thoughts. Tomorrow would begin a journey that might cost him everything he'd spent 20 years building. His reputation, his business relationships, possibly his life, all to help a girl he'd known for less than a week. But as he looked at his father's watch, ticking steadily in the lamplight, Cole realized he'd never been more certain of anything in his life. Some choices transcended logic, reaching down to the fundamental question of what kind of man you were when everything was stripped away. Outside, thunder stamped impatiently in his stall, as if sensing the importance of the journey ahead. Soon they would ride into the darkness, carrying with them the hope that truth was stronger than prejudice, that justice could triumph over greed. The small diary lay open on the desk, its pages filled with a mother's careful handwriting, a record of love, freedom, and the unshakable belief that all people deserve dignity. Tomorrow, that belief would be tested in ways none of them could fully imagine. Dawn was still hours away when Cole and Lila, now Thomas, rode out from the Thornfield Ranch. The darkness provided cover, but it also amplified every sound. The creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth, the whisper of wind through the pines. They had avoided the main trail, instead following Miguel's suggested route through the high country where ancient cattle paths wound between granite peaks. Lila sat her borrowed horse with surprising grace, the masculine disguise complete down to the way she held the reins. In the pale starlight, she truly looked like a young gentleman, accompanying an established rancher on business. But Cole could sense the tension radiating from her slight frame, the hyper-alert posture of someone expecting danger from every shadow. "How? Are you holding up?" he asked quietly, as they navigated a particularly rocky stretch. "Fine," came the automatic response. Then a pause. "Actually, no, I'm terrified. But also," she searched for words, "also more hopeful than I've felt since Mama died." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses picking their way carefully through the unfamiliar terrain. As the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Cole called a halt near a small stream where the animals could drink and rest. "We'll need to be more careful once the sun comes up," he said, loosening Thunder's girth. "These mountains have eyes, and not all of them are friendly." Lila, Thomas, he reminded himself, nodded while attending to her own mount with practiced efficiency. "Mama taught me to ride when I was small," she said, noticing his approving glance. "Said a free person should never be trapped by their circumstances. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Lila's voice carried a weight of grief that made Cole's chest tight. She used to say that freedom wasn't just about papers or laws. It was about making your own choices, even when they were hard ones. Cole thought about that as they resumed their journey through the awakening wilderness. He'd spent so many years making the easy choices, the profitable ones, the socially acceptable ones, the safe ones. When had he stopped asking whether his choices were right, focusing only on whether they were advantageous? The sun climbed higher, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose. They were making good time, but Cole found himself constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The Graysons were experienced hunters. They wouldn't give up easily. Around midday, as they crested a ridge overlooking a wide valley, Cole's worst fears were confirmed. Far below, dust clouds marked the passage of riders, at least 4 of them, moving with the purposeful urgency of men following a trail. "They've found our track," Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Cole studied the terrain with tactical precision. The valley offered faster travel but no concealment. The high route would keep them hidden but slow their progress. Significantly, "What do you think?" he asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. Lila considered the options with the careful attention of someone whose life had depended on making the right choices. "Speed or stealth? Your call." She was quiet for a long moment, then pointed toward a narrow canyon that cut through the eastern face of the mountain. "There. It looks like it heads in the right direction, and those walls would hide us from anyone in the valley." Cole smiled. "Despite their circumstances. Good eye, that's exactly what I was thinking." The canyon proved to be both blessing and curse. Its walls did indeed provide concealment, but the going was treacherous, loose stone, narrow passages, and at least one place where they had to dismount and lead the horses through a gap barely wide enough for the animals' bodies. "Tell me about Lawrence," Cole said during one of their brief rests. "What was your life like there?" Lila's face softened with memory. "Peaceful mostly. Mama had her sewing business, and I helped her with the finer work. She taught me to read and write. Said education was the one thing no one could ever take from us." Her expression darkened. "I should have listened when she said we needed to leave. You were 16. How could you have known?" There were signs. Strange men asking questions around town, people treating us different all of a sudden. Mr. Patterson at the general store stopped extending credit. Mrs. Henley wouldn't let me play with her daughter anymore. Lila's hands tightened on her reins. Mama knew what it meant, but I thought she was being overly cautious. Cole heard the guilt in her voice, the terrible burden of hindsight. None of that was your fault, wasn't it? If I'd insisted we leave sooner, maybe Mama would still be... Her voice broke. Your mother made her own choices, Cole said gently, just like you're making yours now. She stayed to protect what was yours by right, and now you're fighting to honor that choice. They emerged from the canyon as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Before them stretched a high meadow dotted with wildflowers, peaceful and seemingly untouched by human presence. But Cole's instincts were screaming danger. Something's wrong, he said, bringing Thunder to a halt. Lila followed his gaze across. The meadow. I don't see anything. That's just it. No birds, no small animals moving in the grass. Something has spooked the wildlife. Cole's hand moved toward his rifle. We need to go back. The crack of a rifle shot split the afternoon air, and bark exploded from a pine tree inches from Cole's head. More shots followed as riders materialized from concealment at the far end of the meadow. Dutch Grayson and his men, positioned like they'd been waiting for hours. Go! Cole shouted, wheeling Thunder around. Back to the canyon! But more shots came from behind them, and Cole realized with cold certainty that they'd been herded into a trap. The Graysons hadn't just followed their trail. They'd anticipated it, positioning men at both ends of the meadow. Lila's horse stumbled as a bullet caught its shoulder, and she rolled clear as the animal went down. Cole was beside her in an instant, pulling her up behind him on Thunder's back. Hold on! They plunged toward the tree line, bullets whining around them like angry hornets. Cole felt one tug at his coat sleeve, another spark off Thunder's bridle. The stallion ran with the heart of a champion, carrying double weight across uneven ground as if his life depended on it, which it did. They crashed through underbrush and over fallen logs, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Cole's mind raced through possibilities, but they all led to the same conclusion. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with nowhere to run. That's when he remembered Miguel's mention of the old line camp. It should be somewhere near. If Cole could just find there. Through the trees, he caught a glimpse of weathered logs and a moss-covered roof. The cabin was small and isolated, but it represented their only chance. Can you shoot? He asked Lila as they slid from Thunder's back. Mama taught me, she replied, accepting the rifle he pressed into her hands. Cole kicked open the cabin door, grateful to find it stocked as Miguel had promised. Food, water, ammunition, and, most importantly, thick log walls that would stop. Rifle bullets. As Grayson's voice echoed across the clearing, demanding their surrender, Cole found himself oddly calm. This wasn't how he'd planned to fight for justice, but sometimes plans mattered less than principles. Thomas, he said quietly, using her disguise name out of habit. Whatever happens next, I want you to know your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Lila checked her rifle with steady hands, her disguise forgotten in the face of mortal danger. And your father would be proud of the man you've chosen to be. Outside, Dutch Grayson was losing patience. Soon, the real fight would begin. The standoff stretched through the afternoon like a taut wire ready to snap. Dutch Grayson had positioned his men around the cabin, close enough to prevent escape, but far enough to avoid accurate return fire. It was a professional siege, the kind that ended with the quarry either surrendering or dying of thirst. Matheson! Grayson's voice carried across the clearing. You're a smart man. You know how this ends. Send out the girl and you can ride home to your fancy ranch. Cole peered through the gap between two logs, counting muzzle flashes. 4 men, maybe 5, all experienced and well-armed. The odds weren't good. What do you think they'll do if we surrender? Lila asked quietly. Nothing pleasant, Cole replied honestly. These men don't leave witnesses. That's when they heard it, the sound of approaching horses from the south. Many horses moving fast. Cole felt his stomach drop. Reinforcements for the bounty hunters would end this quickly and messily. But instead of joining Grayson's men, the new arrivals took positions surrounding them. Through the cabin's small window, Cole saw something that made no sense. A tall black man in a Union Army uniform, flanked by mounted soldiers. "Dutch Grayson!" The newcomer's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "By order of the Federal Marshal's office, you and your men are under arrest." Gunfire erupted immediately. But instead of being caught between two enemies, Cole realized they were witnessing a three-way battle. The Federal troops were fighting the bounty hunters, not joining them. "What's happening?" Lila pressed against the window, trying to see. Before Cole could answer, a new voice called out, one that made Lila gasp in recognition. "Lila, Lila, child, if you're in there, it's safe now. It's Uncle Samuel." Cole watched the color drain from Lila's face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Uncle Samuel died years ago. Mama told me he died in the war." But she was already moving toward the door, and Cole had to grab her arm to stop her from running outside into what might still be a trap. "Wait," he said firmly. "Let's see how this plays out." The battle was brief but decisive. Federal troops had the advantage of numbers and position, and whatever story the Graysons had been selling clearly didn't hold water with real federal authorities. Within minutes, Dutch Grayson and his surviving men were on their knees in the dirt, hands bound behind their backs. The black officer approached the cabin cautiously, his rifle lowered but ready. "Mr. Matheson, my name is Colonel Samuel Johnson, United States Army. I believe you have someone I've been looking for." Cole opened the door slowly, keeping his hands visible. The man before him was in his 40s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd fought his way up through ranks that hadn't welcomed him. But it was his eyes that convinced Cole. They held the same intelligent spark he'd seen in Lila. "Uncle Samuel." Lila's voice was barely a whisper. The colonel's stern expression cracked, revealing profound relief and joy. "Hello, baby girl. You've grown up." What followed was a reunion that redefined everything Cole thought he knew about the situation. Samuel Johnson, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Johnson, was indeed Lila's uncle, her mother's younger brother, who'd been presumed dead at Antietam. "I was captured," he explained as they sat around a hastily built fire. "Spent 8 months in Andersonville. Imprisoned before escaping. By the time I made it back to Union lines, the war was nearly over, and everyone back home had been told I was dead." "But why didn't you contact family?" Cole asked. Samuel's face darkened. "I tried. When I finally made it to Lawrence after the war, I found your mother's house burned, neighbors claiming she'd run off with some man. Nobody wanted to tell a colored soldier, even one wearing Federal blue, what had really happened to his family." Lila leaned forward. "So how did you find us here?" "I didn't give up. Took me 2 years, but I finally found a witness, old Mrs. Garrett, who hid during the raid. She told me about the men who came for you and your mother, about the forged papers they carried." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. "That's when I learned about the Riverside Manor operation." Cole felt pieces clicking into place. "You know about that plantation?" "Know about it. Son, I've been investigating it for 3 years. Riverside Manor is the center of a kidnapping ring that's been operating since the end of the war. They create false ownership papers for free blacks, then sell them to plantations desperate for cheap labor. The implications were staggering. How many people? Hundreds, maybe thousands. They target families without strong community ties, people who won't be missed immediately. Free blacks moving west, war widows, orphans, anyone vulnerable." Samuel's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "Your mother wasn't their first victim, and Lila wouldn't have been their last." Lila was staring at her uncle with a mixture of joy and horror. "The journal. Mama's journal with all our family records. That's why they wanted it destroyed. Evidence that could unravel their entire operation," Samuel confirmed. "If we can prove even one case of false documentation, it opens the door to investigating all their claims." Cole looked at the bound prisoners. "What about them?" "Grayson and his men. They're small players, hired muscle. The real criminals are the ones running Riverside Manor, and the federal judges who've been signing their forged papers without proper investigation." Dutch Grayson, overhearing the conversation, laughed bitterly. You think taking us down ends anything? This operation reaches higher than you can imagine, boy. Federal marshals, territorial judges, railroad executives, they all get their cut. Samuel's expression didn't change. Then we'll take them all down. As night fell, the true scope of their situation became clear. Lila wasn't just a girl fleeing bounty hunters. She was a key witness in a federal investigation that could expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of territorial government. The men hunting her weren't just motivated by bounty money, they were protecting a criminal enterprise worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The question now, Samuel said, is whether we still need to risk going to Lawrence for that journal. Lila considered this carefully. Uncle Samuel, even with all your investigation, do you have proof that would stand up in federal court? Testimony, some forged documents we've intercepted, financial records showing unusual money transfers, but nothing as concrete as original. Freedom papers and family records that predate the alleged ownership claims. Cole understood. We still need that journal. Then we go together, Samuel said. I've got 12 good men with me, all veterans who know how to handle themselves. If there are more of Grayson's associates in Lawrence, we'll be ready for them. But Lila was shaking her head. You don't understand. The journal isn't just hidden, it's protected. Mama set up the hiding place so that it could only be opened by someone who knew our family history intimately. Questions only I would know the answers to. Cole felt the weight of destiny settling around them. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had grown into something much larger, a chance to strike a blow against institutional injustice, to protect not just Lila, but hundreds of other victims. There's something else, Samuel said quietly. The reason I was able to track you here, to arrive at just the right moment. We've been monitoring telegraph traffic to and from Riverside Manor. 3 days ago, they sent word to their contacts in Colorado Territory, offering $1,000 for confirmed capture of a specific runaway, a young woman whose family records could expose their entire operation. The enormity of it hit Cole like a physical blow. Lila wasn't just valuable to them as another slave to be sold. She was the key to dismantling a criminal organization that had been operating with impunity for years. So this was never just about me, Lila said softly. No, child, Samuel replied. It was about justice, your mother's justice, and justice for every family they've destroyed. As Cole looked around the fire at the faces surrounding them, federal troops prepared to fight corruption, a young woman determined to honor her mother's memory, an uncle who'd never stopped searching for his family. He realized this was no longer just about protecting one girl. This was about deciding what kind of nation they were going to build. From the ashes of the Civil War, the journey to Lawrence took on the character of a military operation. Colonel Johnson's men rode in formation, scouts ranging ahead and behind, while the main body maintained a steady pace through increasingly familiar territory. For Lila, each mile brought them closer to memories both precious and painful. The life she'd lost and the truth that might restore it. Cole found himself riding beside Samuel, the two men sharing the comfortable silence of soldiers who'd learned to read the landscape for signs of danger. The colonel was a study in controlled intensity, his eyes constantly moving, cataloging threats and opportunities with the precision of someone who'd survived by trusting no one completely. Tell me about Riverside Manor, Cole said during one of their brief rest stops. Samuel's jaw tightened. Started as a legitimate plantation in Georgia, owned by a man named Marcus Whitfield. After the war, when his slaves were freed, he couldn't accept the loss of his property, or what he saw as his property. Instead of adapting to free labor, he decided to steal it. How does it work? Simple and effective. His agents identify vulnerable free blacks, families without strong community connections, people traveling west, war widows with children. They forge ownership documents claiming these people as runaway slaves, then use corrupted officials to make the papers legally binding. Cole felt sick thinking about the scope of such cruelty. And territorial judges just accept these documents? Money talks louder than justice in some courtrooms, Samuel replied grimly. Whitfield spreads his wealth around. Judges, marshals, railroad officials who help transport his victims south. It's a network built on greed and racism. As they crested a hill overlooking the Kaw River Valley, Lawrence spread before them like a patchwork quilt of memory and possibility. The town had grown since Lila's departure. New buildings rising from the ashes of border war violence, but the scars remained, empty lots where houses had been burned, a memorial to the massacre that had claimed so many lives. There, Lila pointed, toward a modest frame house on the eastern edge of town. That's where we lived. The house stood empty, its windows boarded over, garden overgrown with weeds, but the structure itself remained intact, saved from the flames that had consumed so much else. Samuel studied the building through field glasses. Any sign of watchers? None visible, reported Sergeant Morrison, Johnson's most trusted subordinate. But there are fresh horse tracks around the property. Someone's been here recently. Cole felt the familiar tingle of approaching danger. How? Recently? This morning? Maybe yesterday? Hard to tell with this dry weather. The implications were clear. Riverside Manor's agents knew the significance of the journal and were watching the house, waiting for Lila to return for it. What should have been a simple retrieval had become a trap. We could wait them out, suggested one of the soldiers. No, Lila said firmly. Every day we delay is another day they can move more families, destroy more lives. Besides, Mama always said the best way through fear was straight ahead. Samuel smiled at that. She used to tell me the same thing when we were children. Samuel, she'd say, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. They made camp in a grove of cottonwoods, a mile from town, using the remaining daylight to plan their approach. The house sat on a corner lot with good sight lines in all directions, defensible if you were inside, but difficult to approach unnoticed. The journal is hidden in a trunk in the front bedroom, Lila explained, sketching the house's layout in the dirt. But the mechanism to open the secret compartment is tricky. It requires answering questions about our family history, things only someone who truly knew us would understand. Cole studied the simple diagram. How long will you need? If everything goes right, maybe 10 minutes. But if I'm nervous, if I can't remember the exact sequence, she shrugged helplessly. You'll remember, Samuel said with quiet confidence. Your mother raised a strong woman. Trust in that strength. As evening fell, they finalized their plan. Samuel would position his men around the house's perimeter, creating a defensive screen. Cole and Lila would approach from the rear, using darkness and the overgrown garden for concealment. If enemies were waiting inside, they'd find themselves caught between hammer and anvil. But as they prepared to move out, doubts crept in like shadows at sunset. Cole found himself alone with his thoughts, checking and rechecking his weapons, his mind churning through all the things that could go wrong. What if the journal wasn't there? What if it had been found and destroyed? What if this entire mission was based on the desperate hope of a dead woman and the fading memories of her daughter? Second thoughts? Samuel's voice came from the darkness beside him. Third and fourth thoughts, Cole admitted. In my world, you don't risk everything on the contents of a hidden trunk. And yet here you are. Cole considered that. Yes, here I am. Want to know what I think? Samuel didn't wait for an answer. I think you've spent so much time building walls around your heart that you forgot what it felt like to care about something more than yourself. That girl in there, my niece, she reminded you. The words hit closer to home than Cole cared to admit. And you? What's your excuse for risking a military career on a personal vendetta? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. You ever lose family, Mr. Matherson? My wife, consumption, 5 years ago. Then you know that some things matter more than... Career advancement or personal safety? My sister was the kindest person I ever knew, took care of me when our parents died, made sure I got an education, celebrated when I enlisted even though she was terrified I'd never come home. His voice grew thick. She deserved to live free, to raise her daughter in peace. The fact that she died afraid, hunted like an animal, that keeps me awake at night. Cole understood. This wasn't about justice in the abstract. It was about family, about honoring the memory of someone who deserved better from the world. "Time to go," Sergeant Morrison announced softly. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, Samuel's men spreading out to predetermined positions while Cole and Lila approached the house from behind. The backyard was a tangle of volunteer sunflowers and prairie grass, providing excellent concealment but making silent movement difficult. The rear door hung slightly ajar, and Cole felt ice in his veins. Someone had been here, might still be here. "Wait," he whispered, catching Lila's arm. They crouched in the shadow of an old oak tree, listening. Somewhere inside the house, floorboards creaked. Once, twice, then silence. "How many?" Lila breathed. "At least one, maybe more." Cole checked his revolver, then looked into her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" Instead of answering, she pulled out a small object, a brass locket that had belonged to her mother. Inside, Cole glimpsed a miniature photograph of a woman whose strong features and intelligent eyes lived on in her daughter's face. "Mama always said that when you're scared, you should remember who you're doing it for," Lila whispered. "I'm ready." They slipped through the rear door into a kitchen that smelled of dust and abandonment. Moonlight filtered through broken boards, creating a patchwork of shadows that could hide anything. Cole moved first, revolver drawn, checking corners and doorways with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned caution the hard way. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of a life interrupted. Family photographs still hung on the walls, furniture covered with dust sheets like shrouded memories. In the front parlor, sheet music scattered across the floor suggested the violence of that final night. Someone searching, destroying, looking for something specific. "The bedroom is upstairs," Lila whispered. The staircase creaked despite their careful footfalls, each sound magnified by tension. At the top of the stairs, 3 doors opened onto small rooms. The master bedroom was at the front of the house, where shadows moved behind boarded windows. Cole pressed his ear to the door and heard nothing. Either the room was empty, or whoever waited inside possessed the patience of a hunter. "Together," he mouthed to Lila. She nodded, her hand moving to the brass doorknob. In her other hand, she clutched her mother's locket like a talisman against the darkness waiting beyond. Outside, an owl called from the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at shadows. Normal sounds of a sleeping town, but tonight they felt like omens. Cole raised his revolver, Lila turned the handle, and together they stepped into the room where truth and deception would finally meet, where the past and future hung in the balance like a coin spinning in the air, waiting to fall. The bedroom was empty, but the wrongness in the air was palpable. Furniture had been overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, their contents scattered across the floor like the remnants of a life torn apart. Someone had searched this room thoroughly, desperately, looking for the same thing they'd come to. "Find the trunk," Lila whispered, pointing to an old cedar chest near the window. It sat exactly where she remembered, but the lid hung open and the contents were strewn about. Clothes, quilts, personal items that had once held meaning, and now lay scattered like broken dreams. Cole's heart sank. If the journal had been here, it was gone now. But Lila was moving toward the trunk with purpose, not despair. "They didn't find it," she said with quiet confidence. "They couldn't have." She knelt beside the chest and began removing the remaining contents, her movements sure despite the darkness. When the trunk was empty, she ran her hands along the bottom, searching for something Cole couldn't see. "Mama was clever," she explained softly. "She knew people would look inside a trunk, but she counted on them not understanding how it was built. Her fingers found what they were seeking, a small depression in the wood near the front corner. She pressed it, and Cole heard a soft click. "The first question," Lila murmured, then spoke aloud. "What was Mama's maiden name?" Nothing happened. Lila frowned, then tried again. "Elizabeth Sarah Freeman." Still nothing. Cole watched her face cycle through confusion and growing panic. "I don't understand. It should have worked, unless—" Her eyes widened. "The questions change. Mama said she'd update them periodically, in case anyone was watching, listening." The sound of approaching footsteps on the stairs froze them both. Heavy boots, no attempt at stealth. Someone was coming, and they no longer cared about surprise. "Mr. Matherson," a cultured southern voice called from the hallway. "I know you're up there, you and the girl. Why don't you come out so we can discuss? This like civilized men?" Cole recognized the voice from Samuel's descriptions. Marcus Whitfield himself, the architect of the Riverside Manor operation. The man had come personally to Lawrence, which meant the stakes were higher than any of them had realized. "Keep trying," Cole whispered to Lila, then raised his voice. "Nothing to discuss, Whitfield. This ends here." A chuckle from the hallway. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I have something that belongs to you, or rather, someone." Cole's blood turned to ice. Through the boarded window, he glimpsed movement in the street below. Torches, armed men, and in their midst, Margaret, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "Your sister is a lovely woman," Whitfield continued conversationally. "Very spirited. It would be such a shame if something happened to her because of your poor judgment." Beside him, Lila was trying different combinations, different answers, her hands shaking with urgency. "Mama's favorite song," she whispered. "What was Mama's favorite song?" She pressed the hidden mechanism again. "Amazing Grace." Click! A section of the trunk's bottom slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment just large enough for a single book. "Got it," she breathed, lifting out a leather-bound journal wrapped in oiled cloth. But their triumph was short-lived. Footsteps approached the bedroom door, and Cole knew they were out of time. "Lila," he said urgently, "is there another way out of this room?" She looked around desperately, then pointed to the window. "There's a porch roof just below. We used to sneak out that way when I was little." Cole moved to the window and began prying away the boards with his knife. The wood was old and dry, but the nails had been driven deep. He managed to create a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Go," he told Lila. "Take the journal and find your uncle." "What about your sister?" Cole's jaw clenched. Margaret had been captured because of his choices, and he wouldn't abandon her now. But the journal was irreplaceable. It was the key to stopping Whitfield and saving hundreds of other families. "I'll get Margaret. You make sure that journal reaches federal authorities. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." Cole's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is bigger than any of us now. That book represents justice for your mother, for all of Whitfield's victims. Don't let their sacrifice be meaningless." The bedroom door exploded inward, and armed men poured through. Cole fired twice, dropping the first two through the doorway, but more kept coming. "Go!" he shouted to Lila. She squeezed through the window gap and disappeared onto the porch roof. Cole heard her footsteps moving away, then a soft thud as she dropped to the ground. Marcus Whitfield appeared in the doorway, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, whose expensive clothes and silver hair couldn't hide the cruelty in his pale eyes. "Mr. Cole Matherson," he said with mock politeness, "you've caused me considerable trouble." Cole kept his revolver trained on Whitfield's chest. "Not nearly as much as I planned to. I'm afraid your plans are about to change. You see, I have your sister, and the girl can't have gotten far. My men are quite good at tracking runaway property. Lila's not property. She's a free citizen with papers to prove it." Whitfield's smile was cold. "Papers can be forged, Mr. Matherson, as you're about to discover." The standoff lasted only seconds before gunfire erupted from outside the house. Samuel's men had engaged Whitfield's forces, and the sound of a pitched battle filled the night air. Through the broken window, Cole could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly stars. "Your federal friends are outnumbered," Whitfield said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I brought 30 men to Lawrence, Mr. Matheson. Enough to handle a few soldiers and one stubborn rancher." But Cole was listening to the pattern of gunfire, the tactical movements he could discern from sound alone. Samuel's men were disciplined, coordinated. They weren't breaking under pressure. 30 men, Cole repeated. "That's a lot of witnesses to federal crimes. Dead men tell no tales, and tomorrow's newspaper will report a tragic gun battle between federal troops and local citizens trying to recover stolen property. I'll be portrayed as a victim, defending my legal rights against government overreach." Whitfield's confidence was unshakable, built on years of corrupting officials and manipulating the legal system. But Cole detected something else beneath. The cultured exterior, desperation. A man who'd built his fortune on human misery was watching his empire crumble. "Where's my sister?" "Safe, for now. Her continued health depends on your cooperation. You're going to walk out of here with me, publicly surrender, and testify that the girl is indeed my property. In exchange, your sister lives, and you get to keep your precious ranch." Cole almost laughed. "You really think I'd trust a man who makes his living stealing children? You'll trust me because you have no choice. The alternative is watching your sister die, followed shortly by your own death." Very tragic, very final. That's when Cole heard it, a sound that made his heart soar. Thunder's distinctive whinny coming from just outside the house. Somehow his stallion had followed them to Lawrence, had found him despite the chaos and darkness. More importantly, Thunder's presence meant something else. The big horse was trained to respond to whistle commands, a skill Cole had developed during his early years when money was too tight to waste on words. Cole pursed his lips and gave a sharp, low whistle, the signal for "come," the sound of splintering. Wood came from downstairs as Thunder responded in his own way, crashing through the back door like a four-legged battering ram. The house shook with the impact, and Whitfield's men scrambled to avoid being trampled. In the confusion, Cole moved. He dove through the window gap Lila had used, landing hard on the porch roof. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he rolled with the impact and slid to the edge. Below him, Margaret sat bound to a hitching post, guarded by 2 of Whitfield's men, who were now looking toward the house in confusion. Cole dropped from the roof, landing between them with his revolvers drawn. Step away from the lady. The guards were fast, but Cole was faster. His father's lessons about choosing courage over comfort had included practical training in survival. Both men went down before they could clear their holsters. Cole cut Margaret's bonds with his knife. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal," she said grimly. "But Cole, there are more men surrounding the house. This isn't over." Thunder appeared around the corner of the house, riderless but responsive to Cole's whistle commands. The stallion had somehow made it through the battle unharmed, his intelligence and training serving him well. "Can you ride?" Cole asked Margaret. "Better than I can run." He helped her onto Thunder's back, then swung up behind her. "Hold on!" They rode straight into the chaos of the street battle, Thunder's size and speed carrying them through the confusion. Cole could see Samuel's men holding defensive positions behind overturned wagons and water troughs, their federal uniforms making them clear targets in the torchlight. But something was wrong with the tactical picture. Whitfield's men should have been overwhelming the federal troops through sheer numbers, but instead they seemed to be falling back, retreating toward the edge of town. That's when Cole saw why. More federal troops were arriving from the south, not just Samuel's small unit, but what looked like a full company of cavalry. Someone had called for reinforcements. Through the smoke and chaos, Cole spotted a familiar figure directing the new arrivals, Judge Harrison from Denver, the federal judge Samuel had mentioned as being sympathetic to their cause. Somehow word had reached him, and he'd brought enough firepower to end Whitfield's operation permanently. Marcus Whitfield emerged from the house, his cultured demeanor finally cracking. He was shouting orders to men who were no longer listening, trying to salvage an operation that was collapsing around him. "It's over, Whitfield," Judge Harrison's voice cut through the night. "Federal marshals have warrants for your arrest and the arrest of every man riding with you. Surrender now, and you might live to see trial." But Whitfield wasn't finished. His pale eyes found Cole across the chaos-filled street, and his face twisted with rage. He raised a rifle, sighting down the barrel with deadly intent. Cole saw the movement, saw the muzzle flash, felt the bullet tug at his coat. But his return shot was true, and Marcus Whitfield, architect of so much suffering, fell to the dusty street and moved no more. In the sudden silence that followed, Cole heard something beautiful. Lila's voice, calling out from the shadows where she'd been hiding with the precious journal. "Uncle Samuel, I have it! I have Mama's journal!" The battle was over. Justice, for once, had won. 3 months later, the morning sun painted the Colorado Territory in shades of gold and amber, just as it had before Cole's world turned upside down. But as he stood on his wraparound porch, coffee steaming in his weathered hands, everything felt different. The same landscape that had once represented his success now symbolized something deeper, the possibility of redemption through service to others. The Riverside Manor trials had concluded the week before, with Judge Harrison presiding over the largest human trafficking prosecution in territorial history. Lila's mother's journal had proved devastating to the defense, its meticulous records exposing a network of corruption that reached from Georgia to Colorado. 17 federal officials had been arrested, 6 plantations shut down, and over 300 kidnapped free blacks had been identified and released. "Morning, boss," called Miguel Santos, riding up with his usual easy grace. The foreman's smile was broader these days, pride evident in his bearing. The entire ranch had gained a reputation for standing against injustice, and their cowhands carried themselves differently, as men who worked for someone who valued principle over profit. "How's our special guest settling in?" Cole asked. Miguel's grin widened. "Miss Lila's got the horses eating out of her hand already. That girl has a natural way with animals, just like her uncle said she would." Colonel Samuel Johnson had accepted a posting to the territorial capital, tasked with investigating corruption in federal courts. But before leaving, he'd asked Cole an unexpected favor. Would the Thornfield Ranch consider taking on a young woman who needed time to decide what to do with her newfound freedom? Lila had been offered multiple opportunities: a scholarship to a college back east, a position with a missionary society, even a proposal of marriage from a young minister in Denver who'd been smitten by her courage and intelligence. But she'd asked for time to grieve properly for her mother, to find her own path forward without the weight of others' expectations. "She's teaching some of the hands to read in the evenings," Miguel continued. "Says education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you." Cole nodded, remembering similar words from a mother he'd never met, but whose wisdom lived on in her daughter. The ranch had become something of a sanctuary in recent months, not just for Lila, but for other families affected by the trafficking ring. Word had spread through the underground networks that helped displaced people, and the Thornfield Ranch had become a safe haven for those rebuilding their lives. And our other guest? Miss Sarah's in the kitchen with Margaret, planning the school dedication. Those two have become quite the partnership for civic improvement. Sarah Whitmore had surprised everyone, including herself, with her reaction to the trials. Instead of being scandalized by Cole's involvement in dangerous pursuits, she'd thrown herself into reform efforts with the passion of someone who'd found her true calling. She and Margaret had established a school for the children of displaced families, funded by donations from prominent Denver families who'd been shamed by the corruption revelations. The relationship between Cole and Sarah had evolved too, built now on shared values rather than social expectations. She'd proven to have depths he'd never suspected, and her quiet strength during the difficult months of trials and testimony had earned his profound respect. "Mr. Matheson," Lila's voice came from behind him, and Cole turned to see her approaching with a letter in her hand. She'd grown during her months at the ranch, not just physically. though she was taller and stronger from good food and honest work, but in confidence and purpose. What is it? A letter from the Kansas Territory. They want to offer me a position as a traveling teacher working with families who've been displaced by the war. The pay isn't much, but they'd provide a wagon, supplies, and a guard for protection. Cole studied her face, seeing the excitement she was trying to contain. What does your uncle think? He says the decision is mine. But he also says Mama would be proud to see me using my education to help others. And what do you think? Lila was quiet for a moment, looking out over the ranch that had become her refuge. I think I'm ready to stop running and start building. But not just for myself, for all the families who are still afraid, still hiding, still hoping for someone to stand up for them. Cole felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when pulling her from that storm-lashed cabin months ago. This wasn't just about helping one girl anymore. It was about the ripple effects of choosing courage over comfort. When would you leave? Spring. They want me to start with the families settling in the Western Territories, places where there aren't schools yet, where children might grow up without learning to read or write. That's important work. It's Mama's work, Lila said simply, continuing what she started when she taught me that freedom means more than just legal papers. It means the right to grow, to learn, to become whatever God intended you to be. As afternoon approached, Cole found himself in his study, holding his father's silver pocket watch. The inscription seemed to pulse with new meaning. To my son, may you always choose courage over comfort. He'd spent 20 years building an empire, accumulating wealth and influence, becoming someone people respected. But in the space of a few months, he'd discovered something more valuable than success, the profound satisfaction that came from using his advantages to protect those who had none. Margaret appeared in the doorway, with Sarah beside her, both women glowing with the purpose that had transformed their lives. The dedication ceremony is set for next month, Sarah announced. We've had responses from families as far away as California. Word is spreading about what you've built here. Cole looked around his study. The maps, the business ledgers, the symbols of material success that had once defined his identity. They were still important, but they no longer controlled him. Wealth was a tool now, not a goal. What we've all built, he corrected gently. Through the window he could see Lila working with the horses, her easy laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for her own journey, carrying forward the legacy of a mother's love and a community's courage. The silver watch ticked steadily in his palm, marking time toward a future where the unlikely friendships born from the darkest moments would continue to grow, spreading light across a land still learning what it meant to be truly free. Sometimes the most profound changes came not from grand gestures, but from simple choices made by ordinary people who decided that compassion mattered more than comfort, that justice was worth any sacrifice. In the gathering dusk, Cole Matheson smiled and prepared to write the next chapter of a story that had only just begun.